2011 meeting of the Bloomington Housing and Redevelopment Authority to order. I will start with a roll call of attendees. Commissioner Beloga.
Present.
Commissioner Hughim.
Present.
Commissioner Lewis. Commissioner Olson.
Present.
And Commissioner Thorson is present. On to the agenda. We're looking for a motion to approve the agenda for this evening.
Commissioner Lewis, move the agenda. Commissioner Hughim seconds.
Motion by Lewis, second Hughim. I will now do a roll call vote. Beloga. Beloga. Hughim.
Aye.
Lewis.
Aye.
Aye.
And Thorson is an aye. Motion to approve the agenda passes unanimously. On to the minutes of January 12th, 2021. Are there any questions, additions, corrections to those minutes? If not, we'd be looking for a motion to approve.
Commissioner Olson moves that we approve the minutes of that meeting.
Motion by Olson, second by Beloga. Now for the roll call vote. Beloga.
Aye.
Hughim.
Aye.
Lewis.
Aye.
Olson.
Aye.
Thorson is an aye. Motion passes unanimously. On to organizational business. We have the 2021 Hra calendar. Myra, do we have any comments on this? Oh, there we go. It's coming up.
Sorry. The only change to the calendar, if you'll notice, is the special meeting in February to continue this discussion of the strategic plan. And that has been scheduled for the 16th of February, at the same time, 5:30 to whenever we finish.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Olson.
thank you. I noticed, and by the way, I hadn't put in the whole calendar for this year, and I have it all in there now, and made this addition. But I noticed that when we get into June or something like that, or July, that we are scheduled back into the building, and of course that's tentative. Maybe we can go earlier into that mode, but thanks to the staff for anticipating based on good thinking by the city administration. Unless there's more comment, I will move approval of this modified calendar for 2021.
Commissioner Beloga, I think I saw your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Myra, did you send out the notice for the 16th of February? Because I am looking, don't find it.
I did not send out the notice yet because I was waiting for approval of it tonight. I sent out the doodle poll to everybody. And this is the date that everybody could make.
Okay. I just heard to miss something. Thank you.
Nope, I was waiting till I haven't, just so everyone knows, I haven't sent out any of the meeting notice, the criteria yet for any other meetings yet.
Were there any other questions or comments regarding the amended calendar? If not, we have a motion on the floor. Would look for a second.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Olson, second by Beloga. Now for the roll call vote. Beloga. Hughim.
Aye.
Lewis.
Aye.
Olson.
Aye.
Thorson is an aye. Motion passes to amend the calendar. On to new business. Do we have any for this evening?
We do not have any new business.
Very well. On to discussion items. First discussion item is item 6.1, HRA development update. We have the staff report, please.
Good evening, Commissioners. Sherry Shoquist with the HRA. Please give me a moment while I pull up the report. It's not where I expected it to be, so thank you for your patience, much appreciated. It is coming now. Can you see my screen? Yes, good. So this evening's Opportunity Housing Project update, I will focus primarily on the information that is new from our last meeting. Our goals remain to promote the development of affordable housing, preserve naturally occurring affordable housing, and furthering product development in the city. Our projects in the pipeline, this is the overall map. The planning department has not updated this since October, but at your next project update, you will see some changes in this map. We are familiar with the projects that are currently under development. The district will be ready for occupancy by March 1st. They are currently leasing up. They anticipate that tenants may be able to move in mid-February, although they aren't making any promises. If they receive their certificate of occupancy sometime in February, they will be reaching out to tenants to give them that option. The HRA staff is working with the leasing office and I think has referred at least a dozen potential tenants or residents to the leasing office at the district. The website is up here. I encourage you to take a look at that at your leisure. I include some new photos, the entrance, the streetscape. This is the model unit that prospective tenants can make appointments to go in and see prior to lease up. And these are some photos of the entry mailboxes, the elevator area, as well as the north entry stairs, the club room with a club room fireplace, and the photo without the carpet is the yoga room. The photo with the carpet will be the fitness center, and then a photo of the underground parking. One thing to mention with the district is the developers with both United Properties and Stewart Co. would very much like the HRA Commission to come and take a tour of the property in person. However, the Public Health Department in the city of Bloomington would not support that. So sometime probably in March, the developers will be coming back to the HRA Commission to talk about the property at 1801 American Boulevard, and at that time, the commissioners will have an opportunity to see more pictures and talk to those developers about that project.
Real quick, Chair Thorson here, is the health department's is this a recommendation or a strong discouragement of an in-person whether it be the entire commission or individual small groups, whatever. But tell me about that. Is it a recommendation from the health department?
Thank you, Chair, for those, and I defer to HRA Administrator Coleman on this issue.
It's beyond a recommendation, as there is currently a policy in place for the staff of the city and gathering and coming together and even working in the office. So it's beyond a recommendation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Village Club 172, the new construction, as you know, is currently under construction with occupancy planned probably in September of 21. Flats, be pleased to repeat that this project closed on its financing in December. There have been environmental response funds awarded by the state, and we expect to receive notice of a potential award from Hennepin County. Construction begins any day now and is estimated to be complete by December 2021, so at the end of this year. And we will be releasing a media announcement when the project begins construction, with all of the funding awards from the city, the county, and we will be also planning a much larger media release and hopefully in-person tour of the development once it is complete at the end of this year. Penn Terrace, it had decided not to go for the January bond funding application and will likely apply for RFP process from the state Minnesota Housing this summer. And then potential developments. One that will be before you probably the first cycle of March is 8012 Old Cedar Avenue. The numbers are backwards there. 68 units, 6 units at 30 AMI with a mix of 57 and 80 income averaging. The great news is that on January 12th, the award announcement was made that this project received $11 million in bonding from the state and will be a tax credit project. This is another very fast closing deadline of July 1st, 2021. This project is more than double the density that is currently allowed on site at Old Cedar and 80th Street. We will be adding increased density in site area to the Opportunity Housing Ordinance amendments, and that those amendments will be before you at the HRA, also likely the first cycle in March, if not before. You know, 1 American Boulevard, I mentioned briefly in the update with the district. You can see this is where the other development has occurred, and it's this corner lot at 1801 American Boulevard that will be up for development, likely about 98 to 100 units of housing. I have no updates at this point on the 98th Street station, other than that we are looking for funding for a traffic study so we can get this project moving. We need about $250,000 for works to begin the traffic study. Originally, the HRA had believed the traffic study was necessary only to meet requirements of right-of-way funds that Public Works was obligated to. However, HRA staff has now learned that this traffic study is very important to carry on the goals of Stantec's Lyndale Avenue suburban retrofit, really looking at a multimodal traffic study, not just the Bloomington Freeway, but all the bikeability and walkability of 98th and Lyndale together. So we are working closely with the Met Council, Metro Transit, and hope soon to be including Hennepin County in that team to fully explore moving this development forward, truly a gateway project in the Gateway District. And so more to come on this project. Likewise, 700 American Boulevard, we continue to move forward on. There is the project at Old Shakopee and Old Cedar that we're still working on the total unit count. I believe in addition to the 149 are 12 townhome units that are also rental, and it will likely be 20% at 50% AMI. Port Authority projects are still moving forward, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions regarding this presentation? Once again, any questions from anyone?
Chair?
Commissioner Olson.
I'm wondering if staff, Ms. Joquist or whoever can make comment. Are we beginning to, I get the feel that we are beginning to actually activate or move forward on momentum about the Gateway project that seemed to be building until about a year ago and COVID and so forth. Are we finding that one of the goals about once we developers see some projects that more will be showing interest?
Commissioner Olson, yes. And, you know, I'd like to point out that 8012 Old Cedar and the Branson Old Shakopee projects, you know, are two examples of projects that were not before the HA. You know, they just became part of our goals in the past couple of months. And, you know, even when we were making our reports to the City Council and the Hra Commission this summer and fall, those projects had not yet come forward. So I think they're two prime examples of how this momentum is growing. And, you know, we still have several developers interested in both the 98th Street Station and the 700 American Boulevard city-owned properties. And so I believe that, you know, those two developments will take longer before they're ready to break ground. Those are not 1 year cycle developments. They will take 2 or 3 years, but with Administrator Coleman's leadership and a new community development director on board, I'm confident that those projects will begin to increase their momentum as well.
Thank you. Good to hear.
Any other questions or comments? If not, thank you very much. Great presentation. Nice to see all the progress. We'll now move along to item 6.2, Hpa Commission Bylaws.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Orson, members of the Commission, Erica Coleman, HRA Administrator. So provided in your packet was the bylaws that we are currently operating under. And tonight or this evening, we have our general counsel for the HRA, Carla Peterson, who is available to go over roles and responsibilities of the board, process, and statutes, because there are some things that could be proposed or concerns that you guys have raised previously that you'll raise again this evening to provide clarification. So I want to put it back to the commissioners at this point. Do you want to start in with some of the things that you have identified that you wanted to address for the bylaws, or do you want Ms. Peterson to go over just roles and responsibilities of the HRA Board or Commission at a high level at this point?
This is Chair Thorson. I'll share my opinion here. I think the high-level presentation would be very useful and it may put other things in some context. So that would be my recommendation. Would be looking for obviously input from everyone on this.
Mr. Chair?
Commissioner Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I was reading through it and taking some notes here and there, it strikes me that there are some things that are obviously in need, in my opinion, of some review and probable change. And so that wouldn't be a high level thing. I can mention a couple of them and then hear from other commissioners before we decide how to move forward. But the in the opening paragraph, it looks to me like the amendment in 1977 does not show City Council adopting that. I'm just wondering if that procedurally is something that needs to happen. And then secondly, another generalized kind of thing is that there are several places that I've noted that it seems like this language goes back, I don't know, is it a couple decades? There's no date on here about when it was last dealt with. But for example, under Article 2 on meetings, it talks about notice shall be published in the official newspaper delivered to each HRA member commissioner. And it seems to me that we're in a digital electronic age now, and I'm just wondering if there's some procedural kinds of things that should be updated to reflect that. So those two things are on my mind about how we proceed, and I'll listen to what the rest have to say.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Olson. Commissioner Lewis.
Yes. I think that John brings up a good point, but I would like maybe that high level discussion first with the attorney, because I want to know from her what exactly we can change and what we can't change. What John is saying is, sounds very accurate, but I would like to know for sure, what needs to stay there, what can be adjusted. Because I know the bylaws still depend on or have to be compliant with a lot of state laws and other rules. So I would want that high level discussion, as well as an opportunity then to look into some of the issues that John has brought up.
Thank you, Commissioner Lewis. Any other comments on this? Please speak up if I can't, if I don't see anyone. Commissioner Beloga, did you raise your hand?
I did, Thorson, and I also think that we should turn the floor over to Carla Peterson and allow her to give us an overview as to what our powers and authorities are, and some conversation about items that are needed to be updated. Thank you.
Hakeem, do you have any thoughts on this?
I'm am on the same page with other people and the other commissioners with the regards of getting an overview, but also having a discussion, so.
All right, I think I'm hearing some consensus to, have the high level kind of overview discussion, some of the history, some of the legal aspects of HRA boards. And certainly there will be ample time and a lot to discuss. I have a couple items as well as we move forward and discuss the bylaws. But let's begin with the overall presentation. I think this would actually be very, very useful.
Chair Thorson, commissioners, it's Carla Peterson, your legal counsel. Erica and I didn't talk too much about specific items, so this is going to be very high level, and it might be easiest for me to be answering questions of the commissioners as well as we go along. The Minnesota statutes are very, very general about your bylaws. All it says is that you are to select a chair and a secretary from among your commissioners and adopt bylaws and other rules for the conduct of its affairs that it deems appropriate. Now, to the comment made earlier about some of the provisions that are in your bylaws, there are statutory provisions that govern that type of thing, like notice of meetings, annual meetings. You have to have an annual meeting at a fixed place. The notice of meetings comes in the open meeting law largely. Your bylaws are probably the most detailed or among the most detailed I've seen. And to answer the earlier question, according to my understanding, these bylaws were last revised in January of 2013. I was not your legal counsel at that time. I've reviewed and analyzed the bylaws several times, initially at Doug Grout's request, and then Sherry and Myra and Brian and I also reviewed them last year. And so I have suggested multiple changes to your bylaws, and the staff has that. So you really have a lot of leeway. In some ways, I would suggest that you not go into a great deal of detail in your bylaws, because then if you want to change things, you have to amend your bylaws. You can just have written policies on a variety of things, which would be easier for you to change going forward. You just change a policy. And then there are some things in your bylaws that I don't believe perhaps you're complying with, or that are outdated based on some of the statutory provisions. So I'm going to stop now and see if there's questions, and then I can continue forward.
Thank you. I like kind of the idea of trying to segregate out what would be changes to bylaws and what would be policies to allow future boards to amend things more easily and to adjust to changing times. So I like that, on the surface, I like that. I also actually find it very surprising that we have one of the more detailed set of bylaws that you've seen, because when I first saw them, when Doug and I and others were, revisiting them just on a very, is this something we should be looking at in the future? And I always thought that they were much more general than I would have guessed other communities have. So I find that interesting. So with that, any other questions or comments for Carla?
Mark, you're muted, not mute.
Commissioner Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are a few things that we have talked about that I think are at what I consider to be the high level. We have had some discussions in meetings over the last couple of months, I think, about where we stand in relationship to the city. And one of the things that comes to mind is no language that I saw in this document, which I believe is our legally binding one, indicates that we are directly beholden to the city council. And so I have a couple of others, but I would appreciate Ms. Peterson making comment about that.
Chair Thorson, Commissioner Olson. Yes, the Minnesota statutes is what would create your, what you would call being beholden to the city. The commissioners are to be appointed by the mayor with the approval of the governing body, which is the council and the board. So you are beholden to the city to some degree because the commissioners are appointed by the mayor. You are a separate legal entity, so you do have the ability to hire your own staff. Historically, my understanding is that the city has hired all of the staff and then has a contract for services whereby the staff is contracted out to the HRA. So there are certain things you can do without city council approval because you are your own separate legal entity. But appointment of commissioners is to be done by the mayor of the city for city housing and redevelopment authorities.
Okay.
Follow up, please, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Olson.
Thank you. It seems to me that because we were going in a different direction and the language in these bylaws do not even hint at that, except for, I think, there's maybe one or two phrases. If somebody is on the staff of the city, which implies the opposite. So I've got 2 or 3 notations in my notes that it seems to me we should have either something appended to this document or that we have some kind of a handbook or something that ends up giving the kind of information that you just have. Unfortunately, I think there was some tension or stress or whatever between some people on the city side, administration-wise, maybe from the council, I'm not sure, and us, because we were at point, for example, of getting an administrator to replace the interim. Some of those discussions were, in retrospect, with what we've just heard, in my mind, unnecessarily somewhat contentious. So, is there a way that this kind of information can be somehow provided, if not as something attached to the bylaws in a policy book or organizational description book?
Thank you, Commissioner Olson. Do we have any comment from legal counsel on that one?
Well,
It sounds to me like that's what you're maybe was referring to as sort of the policy versus the bylaws, perhaps?
correct. You could put these statutory provisions into your bylaws if you'd like in more detail. And you certainly could add more detail to your bylaws. Things, so we can think about what things maybe would make more sense to be in a policy versus in the bylaws. I do think that we should be updating the bylaws if it's not clear that they're marrying up with the statute. And some other things that I know have been discussed were adding to the commissioners, for instance. So your bylaws say that you will have at least 5 commissioners, but no more than 7. But your enabling legislation limits you to 5. So you would have to go get legislation to do that. So really, you couldn't appoint 7 commissioners today, for instance. I'm looking on Article 3, Section A on commissioners.
Mr. Chair?
Thank you. One moment, please. Carla, on this, I'm glad you brought up the concept of, the size of the board. And we've also had some discussions about whether as a policy measure that the board, should be made up of, have specified seats, might represent geographic or other factors. All of these are very worthy of discussion. The other thing, and I still think it would be useful to step through some process, some overview. And in a moment, I'll have one perhaps suggestion here, but also within the context of what we're talking about here, to the degree that you have the information, I'm always curious about, for cities of a similar size or similar makeup, kind of what other HRA boards, how they're approaching some of these. I just think it's always useful information. It doesn't mean we have to follow, we can lead, but I think it's always useful information to see what other communities are doing in terms of the very items we're going to be discussing regarding our bylaws. And then I'll move on to one suggestion, Carla, if there's any kind of broad overview that you've prepared as to, HRA boards and general statutes and general rules, I think that would be useful. The other thing that might be useful, I'd be very interested in other commissioners, because I want to make sure we're very focused on the items we've brought forth in the past as well. But perhaps it would be useful, since you and staff have gone through a process of suggesting some amendments. Obviously, those haven't come before us yet for discussion. But if you've gone through a process, that might be a useful way to step through the process as well. But I'm very interested in everyone's, all board member input on that approach. Do we have any thoughts or comments on it?
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Olson?
I'm trying not to jump in here too quickly and like to hear what other people have to say, but I'm puzzled, frankly, that as long as I've been involved with the city planning commission, council, and HRA, that these kinds of things that I, for example, are bringing up. I mean, when I saw in the bylaws that it could be up to 7, it was kind of like, why, we've talked about trying to diversify or at least discuss diversifying the membership on the board to serve the people that that we're trying to help out. But it just seems to me that at this point it can be tabled, but that we need to have some awareness that we are going to have some kind of a document that says what Ms. Peterson has just said. In other words, statute overrules what was set up in this document, and since there are things that supersede what is in this document, it seems to me that we just really need to know as commissioners. How do we do that process-wise? How do we get that?
Commissioner Olson, I would say, I know that, and it could have been way in the past, there was, general discussion on the board of that very issue of the fact that we have 4 board members, and to increase that would require change in statute. But I think there was a bit of a start in talking about this to a board, and back in when Doug was administrator, and then when he left, and of course, COVID and everything follows. I think this is where we are now. And I think that in terms of issues like the number of members, I think that is why I think it would be useful to have either, high-level presentation from Carla, or step through each section for discussion purposes. We don't have to make a decision on each section. And clearly, if we are going to move forward with a change of bylaws, which I'm guessing we need to make many changes, that this will come back to us after Carla has gone through and perhaps our city attorney has drafted things. But I would suggest that we perhaps the best approach would be to step through each section of the bylaws and have Carla indicate where there have been recommended changes from staff, and we can discuss those as we go.
So, Chair Thorson? Yes, this is Erica Coleman. So I just want to clarify that Ms. Peterson does not have a presentation to provide. Just the standardized by statute, the roles that a HRA board can take, or the role that HRA board does play. And so I just want to note that before we go through each section, to make sure that it is notated on what changes that have been discussed or talked about at a very, very high level need to be made. So one, the location. So making sure the location is correct. The location is actually Civic Plaza. Two, the purpose. I want to make sure that the purpose includes home ownership. If you'll read your bylaws right now, there's no mention of home ownership, which is something that is very much in tune with what I have heard in my short time here. Three, that there is the Minnesota Statute 469 is the standardized statute. And then going into the setup of the meetings and what a quorum is, as well as regular and or special meetings, and then the notification period. I will also add that in the statute that created the Bloomington HRA did identify 5 commissioners. And that statute 469, which is listed, does identify no more than 7. And so we are referencing in particular the statute that created the Bloomington HRA, said 5 members. I will offer that you can look at the makeup of your board. When I say that, I mean that we do have a seat or seats for council members. You could consider council members becoming liaisons to the HRA board and offering a seat to a different resident, whereas the liaison would not necessarily be a voting member, but that is just a consideration. That would technically be a liaison and not a commissioner, so ex officio member. Also, the layout of the meeting, so identifying the different topics that you will discuss in each meeting, the succession of officers, whereas you have a chair, a vice chair, and a secretary, looking at the vice chair automatically becoming chair in the next session, where that continues to rotate when you're electing your officials. And then the terms of being able to approve or look at borrowing money or resources, as well as the appointment of the administrator. I want to highlight that because there is a city services contract that the HRA has, yet the bylaws only reference the administrator. And so you do have some opportunities to look at different things there. But those are the things that in my time as the administrator I have heard, and I want to make sure is highlighted, and to stress that Carla does not have a presentation, but she is available to answer questions. But I want to make sure that I am capturing and addressing everything that the commissioners are bringing up, and that we are able to parse out what should be in the bylaws and what you feel should be a policy, and that we will have the ability to look at the bylaws as recommended, any changes, and vote on it as commissioners at the annual meeting in March.
Thank you. Among those things that were brought up, are there any other specific items? And again, I will be walking through this document, but are there any other items that anybody feels strongly about that we throw out there right now? Commissioner Beloga, I saw your hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Erica got the majority of what I had on my list. Other than web meetings, I think that the bylaws need to acknowledge that that is a methodology that's approved to have meetings. Other than at City Plaza, City Hall, I think as it is currently referred to. And I will emphasize one thing that the administrator Coleman said, and that is home ownership. And the City Council reviewed last night the Planning Commission's work plan for 2021. And again, the issue of home ownership, and that the HRA's assignment is that, and there's an expectation from Council to the HRA that a plan shall be coming forth out of the strategic plan, addressing how to increase home ownership within our city. So just to give some context to the comment of the administrator.
Chair Thorson, Commissioner Below, can I just make a quick comment on, sorry, I'll let people mute, I think I'm getting feedback. On the purpose that's
Yes,
set
go ahead.
forth, it's the purpose as it's set forth in the bylaws comes almost exactly out of the Minnesota statute. And so I would suggest not modifying that. I did suggest specifically referencing 469 there. That does not limit your ability to provide rental or home ownership dwellings, but you do have to comply with the Housing Authority Act, which does limit to some degree the type of housing that you can provide.
Thank you. Again, I think, Erica, would you be comfortable stepping through this document from beginning, and we'll touch on each paragraph and discuss anything that might need to be discussed as a board?
Absolutely, Chair Thorson. I am.
All right. Let's, if there are no more questions or comments, let's begin that process. I'm sure we'll have a very robust discussion. A lot of questions will come up along the way, but let's just move through the document and see where we get here.
Okay. And so to be clear, because I did hear from previous administrator and staff about suggested changes, I am looking at suggested changes right now. So that's what I'm reading off of. And so I'll be very detailed. So the very first thing, bylaws of the Housing and Redevelopment Authority in and for the city of Bloomington, Minnesota. There's just a suggestion to capitalize that in and for the city of Bloomington, Minnesota, to match Housing and Redevelopment Authority. And as we go into the preamble, the first thing is in the second to last line, being clear that the city council is of the city of Bloomington. And there is, and I'm gonna ask Carla here, because this references an adopted resolution in accordance with findings under state law. And I am not sure what this refers to. Carla?
So you're looking at the preamble, Erica, is that correct?
Yes, and I have a note from you that the resolution does not reconcile with the noted resolution.
I have not seen that specific resolution dated that day. So I forwarded you, Erica, the enabling legislation, but I have not seen that city council resolution, which is why I put that note there, because as your legal counsel, I want to make sure that I can verify that all of these references are correct. So that's something we still need to look into further. one other comment on the name of the HRA. I certainly agree with capitalizing it. This has been something that there's been confusion over the years, and I think it's because the title of the bylaws says it's of the Housing and Redevelopment Authority in and for the city of Bloomington, Minnesota. But then when you actually read the bylaws itself, Article 1, Section A does not include Minnesota at the end of your name. So that's something that we've had to correct multiple times, because oftentimes documents have had the Minnesota at the end of the name, which according to your current adopted bylaws is not your legal name. So I just wanted to point that out as well.
Thank you very much. So I have one question. Carla, Carla and commissioners, is there opposition to striking the line that references on the 14th day of June, 1971, the city council adopted a resolution? Because this commission was created by statute, and that is referenced before that line.
Quick comment there. I think you should reference the city council resolution as well, because the city had to also take action as well as the special legislation. We should just try to find an actual copy of that resolution. And if that's not the correct date, then we should correct it.
Noted. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any comments or questions from commissioners for this first part?
So what I'm hearing is, by and large, a preamble with possibly some tweaking is likely to remain the same.
That is
and
correct.
It's more of a legal standing.
That is correct.
Thank you. Any other comments on the preamble? If not, we can move on.
Thank you. Article 1, authority. There are no proposed changes for Article 1, Section A. Section B, office. Just because since Civic Plaza has been built, it was actually titled Civic Plaza. So suggestion of changing City Hall to Civic Plaza to accurately reference the proper name. Section C, seal. The HRA does not have an official seal. Section D, purpose. And so currently reads the HRA's purposes pursuant to Minnesota law are to provide a sufficient supply of adequate, safe, and sanitary dwellings in order to protect the health, safety, morals, and welfare of the citizens of Bloomington, to clear and redevelop blighted areas, to perform those duties according to comprehensive plans, to remedy the shortage of housing for low and moderate income residents, and to redevelop blighted areas in situations in which private enterprise would not act without government participation or subsidies. The proposed change by legal counsel is to strike the word law from the first line after Minnesota and to add statutes, chapter 469. I do have something else, just as reading this, and Carla will need to advise. The wording or phrase citizens is actually, it actually just limits who we're here to serve and help. And I understand Carla said earlier that this came out of statute. So Carla, I would like to ask, are we allowed to change that to residents of Bloomington? Or does it need to remain the way it is?
Because the statute has that exact language, I would be hesitant to do that. Of course, your jurisdiction is within the city of Bloomington, your area of operation, but this is the purpose basically of all housing authorities are these specific 5 statutory purposes. Actually, there's 4 that apply to you. There's a 5th one that applies to cities of the first class, and we also looked at that. If you have a city of the first class, you can provide housing for persons of all incomes. Bloomington is still about, I think, about 20,000 residents short of being a city of the first class. but the 4 that are listed in your bylaws are almost verbatim from the statute. So I would be hesitant to change that.
Okay, thank you. I want to add that, Carla, correct me if I'm wrong, low and moderate income, that is a cap of 80% area median income, right?
You know, Erica, I have not researched that. It depends on the program that you're applying for. Generally, yes, 80% is the limit to be moderate income.
Thank you. Commissioners, I am making note of that because I would like to have a little bit more information on if that is the purpose of our HRA and that is formed by statute. Are we okay with staying in that mostly, but going above that for some programs? So that is why I asked that question. So I just want to be transparent about my thinking on that. Are there any questions from commissioners, thoughts, or any input from staff?
Any questions or comments?
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Olson.
thank you. Given this another process question, I'm not sure how often the statutes are reviewed, and sometimes it happens when there is litigation that is brought forward, but also opportunity to lobby for that. It seems to me that the terminology citizens compared to residents is one that we have kind of gotten away to and more toward talking about residents in terms of our strategic plan and so forth. Council Member Beloga can maybe comment. I was involved in those forming, but I'm just wondering if in fact I'm correct that either it would happen through litigation, but how does it come to the attention of legislators that there's a desire, for example, this HRA, to review that if in fact we do? I think I'm directing the question through the chair to Legal Counsel Peterson.
Commissioner Olson, could you state what the specific question is? Is it whether you can change the word citizens to residents?
Right. You indicated that you referred to the statute and the statute would rule, of course, understood. So if we were to, or other communities as well, were interested in changing that, what is the process?
Oh, so you're asking what the process would be to change the statute itself?
Right. To promote that. We don't have the authority to change it, but to promote attention, discussion, and potential change.
Well, I mean, as with any legislation, you would need to find a sponsor to sponsor that bill. But I would think that what you would want to do if there was some sort of push to change that is probably have a broader discussion with other housing authorities, because of course this will apply to all housing authorities. The one thing I would ask though is, what are you thinking is the substantive difference between using the word citizens versus residents?
Carla,
Yes.
I will answer my thought process since I brought it up. And
Okay.
it is that Minnesota has a higher number of undocumented residents. And Bloomington in particular has a higher number of Latinx residents. Not saying that they're not undocumented. I'm not saying that, but they could be. And so there is a reference here to make sure that we are being inclusive as well as representative of what we feel our true purpose is and how we have already spoken about the programs and services that we do offer. So that is my thought process behind that term citizens and changing it to residents.
Okay, I understand where you're going with that, Erica, that you're thinking of citizenship in being a citizen of the United States, or yes, I understand that. Although I would assert that the use of the word citizens would not stop us from serving that population.
Thank you. No, it would not. But it has been brought up by undocumented advocates and advocates for the undocumented residents, at least in Minnesota as a whole. And so the term, I've learned this is not something that I came up with, I had to learn it. The term citizens actually makes quite a few people feel unwelcomed or unserved. And so that's why I was bringing that up. But I do understand what it's referencing, but this was something I learned, and so I just needed to speak upon it.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I appreciate that. And I think that, what you were saying, that there's been some outcry and some push from groups, that might be helpful if you were to make a legislative endeavor, that you would have support of a variety of groups beyond housing authorities for the legislation. I don't know how controversial this type of legislation would be. Frankly, if we were to increase the number of board commissioners from 5 to 7, I would suspect that would not be controversial. This, because of course of the heightened political climate and discussions around this particular issue, could be more controversial, unfortunately.
And just a thought as we go through this process, not specifically about this item, but it certainly comes to mind, is this could be one of the areas where the bylaws, for legal reasons, having to do with statute, words have to be fairly specific and fairly in line with statute, and yet we can address those issues in our strategic plan and the attached policies, which we've talked about the idea of having attached policies here. So just a thought as we go on through the discussion here.
Thank you, Chair Thorson. Are there any other comments or questions? Seeing none, I guess we can move on.
Erica, thank you.
Thank you. So Article 2, meetings. Myra, could you scroll just a little bit so I could see the next page? Okay, thank you. Could you scroll back up? So the suggestion for Article 2, the header meetings, is to just make sure that it encompasses the sections that are involved or are under this article. So adding quorum and voting, which are sections of this article. So that's just adding to the title. Section A, annual meetings. Just reiterating, there should be an annual meeting of the commissioners held in Bloomington Municipal Building. So proposing changing that to Civic Plaza, just to be in alignment with the change before. On the first regular meeting date in March at 5:30 p.m. So I would like to ask the commissioners about changing the annual meeting date to be a regular meeting date in January, thereby not waiting until we're into the end of the first quarter to have our annual meeting, which is where we do take care of board business. But I put that back to the commissioners to think about that.
I know I've been on this board quite some time, but is there any history to why it was March? Does anybody have any recollection of that? And is it tied to any budgeting or other processes that would typically take place?
Chair Thorson, I don't have history, but I would ask if any staff or Carla has history to please speak up if you do.
This is Brian. I have no history that I know of why it's been March, but it has been for ever since we were created. So,
Mr. Chair.
Is there any downside? I mean, to anybody on, particularly on staff, because you deal with all this, any downside to making it earlier? It seems to make sense to make it more of an annual item. I believe our city council has its business meeting and appointment so in that typically the first month of the year. But again, looking for both questions and comments from HR board members here. And then Commissioner Olson, I believe you spoke up.
Thank you. Actually, given the discussion before about we having a much more detailed bylaw than is typical apparently, it seems to me that this would be a good place for more generalized information or wording. For example, regular meetings will be determined at the annual meeting or something like that, and take it out of the actual bylaw. In other words, making it a policy thing or an easier to change thing.
Thank you, Commissioner Olson. Any comments on that?
Yeah, real quick, Chair Thorson, I just want to clarify. So Commissioner Olson, you are proposing that the Section A annual meetings just states that there is an annual meeting, but does not specify when that meeting occurs?
That would be the net effect. However, it's if some wording is more generalized, but taking out the specific day and time.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner, Chair Thorson, I just want to add, just for context, the annual meeting would be the meeting in which you would do any changes to the bylaws, review bylaws, you would vote and elect officers for the board. The annual meeting should be the meeting in which the work plan is brought forward for the year. So it could be a very heavy meeting. I think it would be good to have it earlier in the year, but I defer to the commissioners.
Thank you. I mean, I think it makes sense. I think that I assumed that if we move the annual meeting to any other time other than what it is, it would certainly involve the election of officers. I would hope that if there's a work plan and other things being brought forward, that those would be items that we would have seen, we would have been working towards, and that would be a formalization more than anything. Because as you said, if we have a meeting where we're choosing our financial, depositories and electing officers and so on like that, to get into a lot of strategics at that first meeting may not be appropriate, and might be more appropriate after the new board chair and so on is acting. So that's just a thought. But again, I think what triggered is sort of the work plan to get approved. Again, that makes sense if the board has been talking about that work plan and we're now finalizing it and approving it. That's just my initial thought. As I get my arms around some of this also.
Yeah, yes, thank you, Chair Thorson. Just to answer your question, I did see Commissioner Beloga. Yes, that would be finalizing the work plan with the HRA board. It would be just reviewing it and taking into consideration, knowing what we're moving forward with. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Thorson, board, I can add just a little to that. The statute just requires that a schedule of the regular meetings are to be kept at your primary office. So I think that you do have the flexibility to change the ending date time as long as it's posted, so to speak.
So there again, and we can talk through this more, but let's just hit the changes we want to make. Would we be thinking this would be a bylaw change or a policy change? In other words, the bylaws would indicate that there will be an annual meeting, and the policies would state that annual meeting will be held, for example, in January, and here is what would typically take place at the annual meeting. And that's a question I'm throwing out there.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Hughiem. Oh, Hughiem, I think I saw your hand up.
Yeah, yes, thank you, Chair Thorson. My hand was raised. I would like to suggest, I like the idea of the annual meeting being at the beginning of the year. I would like to suggest maybe at the end of January, just because if you do have new commissioners coming on, kind of giving them a little bit of a, time to make sure they're at that meeting in case, depending on time of when council votes them in to when this happens. I just think the last meeting maybe of January would be I think an ideal date for an annual meeting. So thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Hughie, I think you bring up a very good point. Given that the city council often appoints new commissioners for various boards in the month of January, I would actually ask Commissioner Beloga if in fact that is adequate, because I do, Commissioner Hughie, like the idea of including new commissioners, making sure as many as possible are included. We can't control when the city council appoints people, but making sure that new commissioners are part of that annual meeting. So at minimum, I think the suggestion that it be late January is a good one. And I would defer to Commissioner Beloga as to, in his experience, when most commissioners tend to be appointed to new commissions.
Mr. Chair, it varies by year. And for instance, we had one or two boards that we've already done in January. And there are a number of additional boards that have not yet been looked at. And as a matter of fact, the call for applications just closed on Sunday. So by the time we get it, it'll probably be mid-February or thereabouts. If the process becomes elongated, it could easily go into March before people are selected. If there needs to be interviews, which we have done from time to time when we have numbers of candidates who are highly qualified and we want to have some face-to-face contact. We haven't been doing that in the last year because of COVID. And we've had a brief amount of discussion of how we might do that electronically, although we've not come to any conclusions. So I agree with Commissioner Hughie that new members sooner rather than later. And I would suggest that March may be the fallback date, because if we have a date certain in the bylaws, then you have to do it irrespective. The other thing that I would suggest is the business seems to need to be bifurcated, because some of the things, such as the designation of an official newspaper, really isn't necessary for an annual meeting or a bank depository, those kinds of things. They can be done at an early January business meeting and have the other kinds of businesses, such as election of officers and the appointment of assignments, done at an annual meeting.
Thank you, Commissioner Beloga. Any other comments from commissioners in particular on this? Yes, Commissioner Lewis, my apologies.
That's okay. There's been so many things thrown out now that I'm not quite sure what I'm responding to. My first response would be, I agreed with Commissioner Hukim that if we go to a January meeting, annual meeting, it should be at the end of January. Then to your comment, which was down the road, there's been so many people talking, it's hard to get a word in. This might be something that we split up between bylaws and policies, because here again, if something happens that we determine that January isn't a good date, maybe because of the lateness of getting appointments from city council, we may need to switch back to a March date, as Commissioner Beloga mentioned, to keep that as a backup date. It seems like if we made that a policy and kept the bylaws stating annual meeting, but not exact, not the day that it's done. I think that would maybe cover both things, where it would allow us to change that date to, change that annual meeting to January, but still have the option of changing it if we needed to, and not have to go immediately and do a whole adjustment to the bylaws. That would be my comment, and I think that's kind of responding to one of the questions that you had, Mr. Chair.
As you're talking, I'm also wondering if there could be, again, more of a policy than a bylaw issue, but that we have a policy that the election of a board will somehow, only take place when we have a complete board. In other words, again, to make sure we're inclusive of new members. However we phrase that, we want to be careful. But, just the idea that, let's say 2 people, leave the board and leaves us with 3, that board shouldn't be, appointing all 3 of themselves as directors. So if there's some way as a policy to flesh this out and sort of indicate that the intent is to have a full board that acts on these important items. That's just a thought.
Chair Thorson, may I propose to the commissioners, based on the conversation, that Section A, annual meetings, simply states there shall be an annual meeting of the commissioners held in Bloomington Civic Plaza, period. Carla, correct me if that's okay. And then secondly, Section D, conduct of business at the annual meeting, is completely stricken from the bylaws and becomes a part of a policy.
Like that.
Yes, I like that too.
I like it a lot.
Thank you. I think that's a good suggestion. Carla, you there?
Yes, I am, Chair Thorson. I don't have any legal concerns with what's being proposed.
Thank you. Commissioners, is there anybody who's uncomfortable with, we're not deciding this tonight, but it will come back to us, and we hopefully it'll come back to us as a document that we're going to be able to act on. So let's talk through as much of this as we can. So further discussion on this proposal. Commissioner Hugheim, is that a hand?
Thank you, Sheriff Thorson. Just something when talking about with going back to Commissioner Beloga and with the appointment process, I'm wondering if, and I don't know if this is possible, I don't know the legalities of this, but in our policy of maybe doing a something stating that we request applications due by a certain day. I don't know, as a commission, can you regulate that within the city of saying, we want applications done by a certain day? And then that might help, since we all know that the commissions end in December of the year. So I'm just thinking, if we have set dates, then that gives the council maybe the time to do these, get these ready, and have their voting be, either at the annual meeting or even maybe at the end of December. Just something to throw out there as something of a policy of a process of how we want to handle the application process when people terms are ending.
Thank you, Chair Thorson, real quick. And I'll ask if staff knows better than I do, probably. What is the current process for applications, and is it a city process for all the boards and commissions, or is it staggered? That's my first question. Myra?
So right now we are looking at it, and Jack is familiar with this. The idea is that most of the commissions, their term does end at the end of the year. So the process is trying to be pushed back so that new commissioners can be appointed before the end of the year, so that starting on January 1st, when the other commissioner's term expired, the new commissioner can take over. Maybe not January 1st, but at the first meeting that is held for that commission. So they are pushing back the process. Right now it's in development, which is why the applications are coming in right now, because they're trying something, kind of a new process. But the plan is to push it back so that those commissioners are ready to take their position starting January 1st.
Chair Thorson here. I find that interesting. However, and again, this isn't necessarily for HRA to decide, but if I were a newly elected council member, I think I would feel very strongly that that if commissioner or terms were expiring in important commissions, that as a newly elected council member, I might like to have some input as to the people who are appointed to commissions. And I realize that you know, having terms expire at the end of December, you know, creates issues with quorums and so forth. I'm not quite sure what the policy of all the commissions are. However, I could see terms being extended until such time as there is a new appointee. But again, if I were a newly elected council person, I was elected based on whatever platform, but change or whatever it might be, I would be more concerned about the council members having an opportunity to provide input on these important boards than I would necessarily on a commissioner of a individual commissioner on a board being able to participate in an annual meeting, if that makes sense at all. And I will defer to, I first saw Commissioner Beloga's hand up, then I'll get to Commissioner Olson and anyone else.
Commissioner Thorson, you brought up the point that I wanted to bring up about the timing. And yes, the language in virtually all of the organizational documents for all boards and commissions, if it's not now, it's being changed to that people's term ends December 31st or on the appointment of a successor. So they will automatically carry forward to that date. It is a good idea so that the new council members have an opportunity to participate. And not all boards and commissions end on December 31st. There are some that are staggered into, I believe, a June ending. I can't remember offhand which they are, but there's 3 to 5 who fall in that category.
Thank you, Commissioner Beloga. Commissioner Olson, was your hand earlier?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, as I stated at the beginning, my answer to your question about what we should do is definitely that we need to take it out of the detail out of the bylaws. The discussion has been very good to have. One of the key things I think is that we are, I don't mean at the mercy of, but we depend on the council doing certain things. And if we get into a standard, that standard could actually be changed. So all more reason for us to take it out of an actual date and time in the bylaws and have a more generalized statement. If I understand it correctly, this discussion, something was just said that goes to staff, and this will come back to us with actual wording based on all of this.
Correct, Commissioner Olson. I would expect that the staff and legal counsel will be gauging, you know, listening to what we're saying in the direction. We need to provide direction on one hand. On the other hand, we don't necessarily have to do the wordsmithing here. I believe, have a lot of confidence in staff that they'll be able to, you know, take our input and come back with revised documents. So, but we do need to provide them direction.
Thank you, Chair Thorson, and commissioners. I do want to add, as we get into this next part, section B, that there are differing legislative bodies that do make appointments and or budgetary decisions for the incoming elected officials. And yet those same incoming elected officials are able to do that in the next annual or biennial cycle. But as we get into the next section, taking into consideration the conversation that was just had, so section B, notice of annual meeting, That notice shall be published in the official newspaper of the HRA, delivered to each HRA commissioner and each member of the governing body of the city not less than 10 days in advance of such meeting. It shall be responsibility of the administrator to provide this notice. I would like to propose, if okay, public notice shall be made. And then notice of annual meeting provided to each HRA commissioner and each member of the governing body of the city not less than 10 days in advance. Basically, I'm trying to incorporate technological advances and to not be bound by a newspaper or hand delivery, because there doesn't seem to be a way of dictating or being able to prove that things were delivered. But email does do that. Are there any questions or opposition or suggestions?
Any objection to those changes? I think they make sense.
Okay, great. Thank you. Section C, quorum. So this is stating there should be quorum to conduct business at all meetings. If quorum is not present for an annual meeting, the chair shall establish a new date for the new annual meeting and cause notice to be given as provided in section B of this article. If a quorum is not present for a regular or special meeting, the chair shall adjourn the meeting and to the next regular or special meeting of the commissioners. So I have just a couple of suggestions that would be more defining quorum, and a quorum of the HRA is defined as a majority of the commissioners in office at any time. And so it would be changing this section to specifically state there shall be a quorum to conduct business at all meetings of the HRA. So just being clear that it's about the HRA. And then the next sentence to be added is a quorum of the HRA is defined as a majority of the commissioners in office at any time. Everything else would remain the same outside of capitalization. Are there any questions or comments regarding those proposed changes? All right,
Commissioners, Commissioner Beloga?
No,
Commissioner Beloga, go.
I've got it. I just had to think through something. Thanks for
Ms. Peterson, any concerns about this change? And I would just ask that if we're headed down any direction that you feel has legal implications, I'm assuming you'll just let us know quickly, but if not, please do.
Chair Thorson, commissioners, that's correct. Adding the line about the quorum actually is pretty much straight out of the statute as well. And I think that's always helpful because the definition of what's a quorum can change based on the entity and what they determine they need to have for a quorum. But in this instance, because you're a statutorily created and governed entity, I thought it was helpful to add that line. I have no concerns with what has been proposed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So again, section D, we have proposed that becomes a part of policy and not detailed in the bylaws. So we have freedom to change whatever needs to be changed. So section E, regular meetings. There is a proposed change of capitalization and clarification, but also stating that, so I'll read it first, sorry. Regular meetings shall be held by the HRA at a fixed place and at a time as determined by the HRA at its annual meeting. The time may be changed by the HRA at any subsequent meeting by a majority vote of all commissioners and after notification of such change in the HRA's official newspaper. Agendas for regular meetings shall include at least the following order of business. And it dictates 1 through 5, call to order, approval of agenda, approval of minutes, unfinished or organizational business, new business, and adjournment. And so I want to first go back up into this section E and to change the first sentence to state, regular meetings shall be held by the HRA at a fixed place and at a time as determined by the HRA at its annual meeting and in parentheses, regular meetings. Just to provide that little bit more of that flexibility, because we go through the calendar, and as we just had the discussion, we go through the calendar at the annual meeting, but there is a need to probably do the calendar in January. And so just allowing us that little bit of freedom and flexibility around when we are setting the fixed place and time, as we did today. And then the next sentence to state the times or location of a regular meeting may be changed by the HRA at any subsequent meeting by a majority vote of all commissioners. And then striking and after notification, and starting a new sentence that says notification of such change shall be given in the same manner required for a special meeting. So that would be striking the official newspaper. And that was a lot, so I'm open to walking through that a little bit slower if any commissioners have any questions around that. But again, we'll bring this back to you.
Chair Thorson here. So you're suggesting at the end of sentence 1, we have in parens regular meetings?
So at the end of sentence 1, strike annual meeting and put annual meeting in capitalization, and in parentheses and quotation marks, regular meeting, parenthesis S for meetings. Just to give us that flexibility, because we may not set the calendar at the annual meeting. We may set it before the annual meeting.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Beloga has a question.
Commissioner Beloga.
Thank you. Well, my comment was on that, the second line to just go to fixed place and a time determined by the HRA, period, rather than use at its annual meeting or regular meeting. That gives the ultimate flexibility.
Thank you, Commissioner Beloga. There was, I kind of have the same kind of reaction, but I'm not quite sure how to put it into context. Any other thoughts on this item from commissioners? Again, I don't see you all up here. Commissioner Olson, is that a hand up?
I was trying to get my unmute. I agree with what Commissioner Councilmember Beloga just has said. And I have a question on line 3 in our current document. It starts, or it's led into by HRA at any subsequent meeting by a majority vote of all. And we've talked about quorum. So all is to me potentially unclear as whether all present or all of the required quorum vote. I didn't say that right, but I think all needs to be clarified.
Thank you, Commissioner Olson, Chair Thorson. That makes perfect sense to me. So I just want to reiterate what I'm hearing. What I'm hearing is the first sentence to state regular meetings shall be held by the HRA at a fixed place and at a time as determined by the HRA, period. The second line, I am hearing the time may be changed by the HRA at any subsequent meeting by a quorum vote, period. Or something to that effect. Because quorum.
And that would imply a majority of the quorum.
Yes, so quorum as defined earlier under quorum, that's where it was defined. A quorum of the HRA is defined as a majority of the commissioners in office at any time.
Thank you.
And then the last thing would be striking the official newspaper. All right. I do have a question. Oh, is somebody speaking? Sorry.
Yes, it's Carla. Erica, I just wanted to point out for the commissioners' benefit that the statute, the open meeting law, which I mentioned earlier, specifically provides that if you hold a regular meeting at a time or place different from the time stated in your schedule of regular meetings, which you're to keep at your primary office and on your webpage, that you're to give notice in the same manner as provided for a special meeting. So again, this is an instance where the suggestion that's being made is to more closely conform your bylaws to the requirements of Minnesota statutes.
Thank you, Carla. So I will rephrase that, what that next line will say after a quorum of commissioners would state notification of such change shall be given in the same manner required for a special meeting, so that we are in lockstep with the statute. Okay, I do have a question for commissioners and Carla. Is there a need or a desire to expressly call out the titles or topics to be discussed at regular meetings? I would like to seek clarity on that.
I can respond as to the legal requirement. You are not legally required to list this in your bylaws. The reason that sometimes it's advisable to have a list is for the person preparing an agenda, but this could certainly be something that could be in your policies and is not legally required to be in your bylaws.
I would suggest for myself, it seems to me it makes more sense as a policy item as we are going through this and sort of picking our high level items and our policy item. Commissioner Beloga, I saw your hand up.
I know that when the council was going through revising its rules of procedure, there was much talk about the order and having the agenda listed in that document. And the city attorney talked about looking for consistency in all boards and commissions on that. So that may be a sticking point, just a heads up on that.
Thank you. So what I hear is for us as staff to double check what is the standard in the city for boards and commissions when they are detailing the order in their policy and or bylaws or guiding documents. So with that, I will propose staff will look into that and follow up, and to add that if we come to a consensus that it is the standard in the city to include this in the bylaws, then we will need to add 2 sections, new business and discussion items before adjournment, as well as titling number 4, organizational business, so striking unfinished or, and number 5 would be titled unfinished business and striking new. So there's 2 things here. One, for staff to look and see what is the standard with the city and other boards and commissions. If the standard is that it is included, we will need to add topics for the order. If the standard is that it does not necessarily need to be included, staff will need to verify with commissioners on whether you would still like to leave it there or if you would like it to become a part of a policy document.
Thank you. Any comments on this? Erica, are you suggesting we add, tell me more about the discussion. Is that discussion current business? And the reason I ask is we not too long ago talked about the fact that when we had sort of this open item on the agenda to bring up new, I don't know, it wasn't necessarily new business, but we could find ourselves, because we all enjoy this topic and are all looking forward, getting into some territory where we're discussing items that weren't on the agenda and that there might be a concern about that policy?
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair Thorson, for the question. So a couple of things. I believe as we are completing our strategic planning process and identifying better what our mission, vision, and focus is, we will be able to better direct our conversation when we do have new business or discussion items. But two, that discussion items may be necessary because there have been times where there has been conversation or comments in regards to, for instance, the bylaws. And that was not something that was on the agenda. And if there was not an item for discussion items, it didn't give leeway for commissioners to bring up such things.
Thank you. I think that, I mean, I've sort of missed I just think we need to sort of miss the sort of opportunity at the end of a meeting to bring up, virtually, any questions and so on we might have. Just, we need to do so with caution, and I'm sure our staff will help guide us, keep us from going astray in that regard. Commissioner Olson, I see your hand up.
Thank you. This discussion prompts me to wonder about situations that would be emergency. If we had, for example, major civil unrest or something like that, and or COVID came on or something like that, how do we end up notifying legally when there's 24 hours or less notification of a very important need? Let's say that one of our Section 8 buildings burns down, for example, or something like that.
So thank you, Commissioner Olson. You are moving us right along as the next section is special meetings.
Thank you very much.
So Section F, special meetings. Special meetings of the commissioners may be called by the chair for any proper purpose of the HRA upon oral or written notice to each of the commissioners. The notice shall set forth the time and place of the special meeting. That all reads great. However, we do have suggestions to add just a couple of things. That the notice shall set forth the date, time, place, and purpose of the special meeting would be an addition. And the notice to the public for special meetings shall be 1, posted on the HRA official website, and 2, mailed or otherwise delivered to each person who has filed a written request for notice of special meetings with the HRA, or alternatively, published in the official newspaper of the HRA, both no less than 3 business days prior to the special meeting. And sorry, I was just reading the suggestion, and in that suggestion, Carla helped me out here, but I don't want to include the official newspaper suggestion. Are we allowed to do that?
The open meeting law specifically has that language, Erica, but I will point out that it's not currently in your bylaws, but there is a separate section of the open meeting law on emergency meetings. So perhaps we should be adding a section on emergency meetings in addition to the current annual, regular, and special meetings. But it does provide, and again, keep in mind, this is delivering notice to a person who's filed a request for notice of special meetings. The last time we had to call a special meeting, I inquired of staff as to whether there was anyone who had actually filed a written request for notice of special meetings. And at that time, there was nobody who had done that. So this is to get the notice specifically to this person or persons who have filed a written request for notice of special meetings.
Okay, thank you. So with that, I would propose leaving the suggestion the way it is and taking up legal's advice and putting in a section for emergency meetings, which also would get to your suggestion and or question, Commissioner Olson.
Commissioner Beloga, I saw your hand up. Where were you mute? Were you just something? Okay. Thank you, Erica.
Thank you. So if there's no comments or questions, we can move on to section G, conduct of meetings. This is about the conduct of the meeting using Robert's Rules of Order. There are no suggested changes outside of maybe a grammatical with Robert's Rules of Order, but there's no suggested changes. Does anyone else have any thoughts or ideas? Also, I will take this time to ask, do all the commissioners have a electronic or physical copy of Robert's Rules of Order?
Does anyone not have a copy of it in some form? Everyone has a copy?
Can
Thank
go
you.
online. I don't have a hard copy.
Commissioner Beloga.
Well, I think there are lots of editions of Robert's Rules of Order. And while we all may have a copy in hand, we all may be working out of a different edition, which could cause some confusion. So if staff would circulate the most current, I would certainly appreciate that.
Thank you. Good
Thank you.
suggestion. And given the fact that you say there are various editions, are you saying in terms of updates, or are you talking literally different versions or approaches? And if either is the case, I would look to perhaps this might be something the city would want to standardize on in some way.
There are updates. Sorry, Commissioner Beloga.
Thank you. The floor should be yours.
Okay. There are updates to Robert's Rules of Order. However, we do as staff have the simplified version to provide that we can email to everyone around motions, when to speak and how to address, which is, I sit on a few boards myself and I get that every single year. And we even have it on the back of our little place cards when we're in person, so that we can remember how to address the chair and to move motions forward. So it's very helpful. Robert's Rules of Order, I've had an extensive training in it, can be extremely complicated. So that'll be something that we will circulate to all the commissioners by email.
Thank you.
If there's no other questions or comments, we can move along to section H, conflict of interest. Okay, in this section, only offering to change the term member to commissioner. I think it's only accurate. And so that would only be the only change proposed, is to just accurately reflect your titles. All right. So I do have, let's see, sorry, because I'm looking at the suggested changes. I do have a section added, as I mentioned earlier, about voting, so changing the title. Adding section I, and it would be titled voting. And it would say a vote of approval by a majority of those present with a quorum shall be required to take action on or approve any matter before the commission, except that with respect to the following matters, a vote of approval by 3 or more commissioners shall be required to act. 1, to dismiss the administrator of the HRA. 2, if the HRA is an employee of the city, to request replacement of the administrator or cancellation of the contract with the city. And 3, to amend the bylaws. 4, to change the fixed meeting time. 5, to borrow money. 6, to approve a project as defined in Minnesota statute section 469.002. And 7, to issue bonds or other obligations of the HRA. And so these are things that this commission does right now, but this would be specifying and detailing in the bylaws that voting must be a quorum or 3 or more commissioners. So just being really clear, because I think there was some conversation before on certain items, and if members were not there, but there was a quorum, that it just didn't feel right for commissioners to continue to vote on that item without all commissioners present. And so this would be making it clear around voting. Does anybody have any thoughts based on what I just was able to verbally say?
So for clarification, these fairly major, your proposal is these fairly major items to vote on could be voted on by 3 of, at the size of our current board, 3 of 5 commissioners. And that
Yes.
seemed maybe, I mean, my gut reaction to this is maybe too low a bar, but and so that's kind of my first reaction. My second reaction is if we're moving, I don't know if we're going to deal with this tonight, but we've talked about expanding the board, and of course the number may change. But I'm just giving you my first reaction to that.
Chair Thorson, it's Carla Peterson. I just want to point out that what the provision that Erica is talking about right now, if Myra wants to scroll down a couple pages in your current bylaws, part of what's going on here is you see there's a quorum and voting section there. We're trying to, because first of all, quorum was discussed twice in your bylaws, in the meeting section, and then here later in this quorum and voting section, the attempt was made to put what I think we considered to be related matters all in one location, which was why Erica mentioned early on changing the title of Article 2 to Meetings, Quorum, and Voting. So your bylaws currently have these provisions. We're just reorganizing them.
Got it. Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Again, I don't see everybody. Speak up if you need to talk, and I don't see you.
Chair Thorson?
That would be Commissioner Beloga.
Thank you. I think, the suggestion is good. There was a lot to try to grasp as Erica went through that. So I think, we need to allow everyone to, read it and absorb it when we get the second iteration here. But for instances where the board wants to hold something over, that still gives them the opportunity to do so and still be in compliance with this. So, I can support, the suggestion here about voting in the laws, but still have the flexibility on an act to know that something could be held over to a future meeting. If that helps clarify at least my thoughts on this topic.
Thank you, Commissioner Beloga. Any other thoughts, questions on this from commissioners? And again, Beloga, you bring up a good point. We're going through a lot. We're making some suggestions on the run here. We will get a fully marked up copy, I believe, in plenty of time for us to absorb it prior to our next meeting. We all need to, comb through it again and make sure we're all comfortable with what's being proposed, and then bring up any questions or concerns at the next meeting. But again, we'll try to provide as much guidance as we can along the lines of how we're feeling at this moment. But we do need to. We have a lot to absorb from our discussion. So.
Yes, Chair Thorson.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to read, just clarify. Thank you. And so we're moving voting, quorum and voting to this upper article section. Also, possibly looking at raising the number from 3 to 4. And I propose 4 because that's majority at 5 commissioners. and that's majority at 7 commissioners if you choose to do that.
Commissioners, this is a very important item, so I'd like to know for each commissioner kind of how they feel about this item at this time. I won't call on you, but please do speak up on this item.
Mr. Chair, I understand what
Commissioner
Erica
Beloga.
just said. Thank you, Chair. I understand what Erica just said. And I think Carla would need to look at it in as potentially being a conflict to Robert's Rules of Order. So we need to say something possibly in Robert's Rules that if there's a conflict, what prevails? So the bylaws would prevail if there's a conflict over Robert's Rules of Order.
You're on mute, Chair Thorson.
Thank you. I would just add that when I brought up the comment about 3 out of 5 versus 4 out of 5, I don't have a strong opinion right now. It's just sort of a gut reaction. I think we have to ensure that this body, a majority of this body, can move things forward without being too restrictive on these important items. And yet we need to recognize this is a board of only 5 people, and so for me, the difference between 3 and 4 is a pretty big deal in what we're suggesting here. Now, maybe if we proceed and we decide to expand the board to 7, perhaps that would, I guess, spread out the power a little bit more, and I might be more comfortable. But I'm still myself kind of chewing on that one, I have to admit. So, Commissioner Olson and then Commissioner Hughem.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm in many organizations that I've been in, they talk about a percentage instead of a hard number. And there's pros and cons for both, I guess. But it seems to me that if we're talking about a number of the total commission board members, and we have snowstorm and somebody doesn't come or whatever, and it's a timely thing that requires some action, I think we need to, I'd look forward to the kind of review that Commissioner Beloga mentioned. I think it needs to be researched a bit and then come back to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Hughem.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to kind of reiterate that too, I kind of like the 4 as well, but I also do have a concern with what Commissioner Beloga said, is that, and I'm going to be very open here and blunt on the last situation where something was proposed to be tabled, but then there was some more conversation done, and then all of a sudden it was taken off the table and a vote was made. So I just want us to be aware of that as well, is that this has happened in the past, and we want to be very clear that we do stick with the fact that if we feel of tabling something, that is respected and that decision is stuck with. So that's all. Thanks.
Any other commissioners have input?
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Lewis.
I'm the only one who hasn't spoken up. Listening to Commissioner Beloga, I think his comments were very valid, and I would like the opportunity, to wait until it comes back to see what Carla has been able to determine. Because I think that'll be important. That'll help make that decision, whether it's 3 or 4.
And again, I'm still chewing on this one a bit myself, and I think about the fact that very often as an HRA board, we have some very tough and sometimes unpopular decisions to make. And I just mean this very generally. And so therefore, part of me says, 3 out of 5 for most items. Sometimes you have to make hard decisions, and not everybody's gonna be on board. And again, maybe 4 out of 5 is too high of a board bar. So again, I'm still thinking through it. I don't know how others feel, but I think we're having a great discussion here, however. Anyone else have any thoughts, follow-up comments?
I just
Commissioner
wanna-
Thorson
oh.
or Chair Thorson?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I just remember that, you know, we've had resignations from time to time from the board. And that leaves us at 4. And it would be problematic if we have business that we need to do to have 100% attendance to achieve that 4 number. So it's an additional, I'm not advocating one way or another. I'm just giving some factual background. We had a number of meetings that we had 3 people at. And because that was how many we had on the board in town available to do it. Again, with joining web meetings into the process, that may create greater flexibility to add people into meetings, even if they're not physically able to be present in Bloomington for the session.
I would just add that this is the kind of thing that, after this meeting and as we get markups and even before you see anything from staff, these are the kind of scenarios we have to think about before making changes. So we're all comfortable and we think about all the possibilities that could come up in this regard.
Yes, thank you. Real quick, Chair Thorson and Commissioners, I just want to thank you for your comments and note that Commissioner Olson did mention a percentage. Majority of 5 is 2.5 people, and majority of 7 is 3.5 people. So just want to note that. But thank you, Myra, because that's a major question that you brought up, Commissioner Beloga. Should we be adding something in the bylaws about virtual meetings? Because we just went through and we set the meetings to be held at Bloomington Civic Plaza, and there was nothing mentioned about virtual meetings.
Thank you. First of all, regarding that, this might be one where I'm wondering if the city is looking at a policy, for example, once we go back to in-person meetings, will an in-person be required, or can any council member, commissioner come in virtually? That might be a citywide discussion, number one. So that's more of a comment, maybe a question for Jack. And then number 2, I want to acknowledge that I saw Commissioner Olson's hand up a bit earlier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the comment by Administrator Coleman about 2.5 and 3.5, I think that pretty much automatically goes to rounding up. But one of the things that it seems to me is we're back to talking about what belongs in the bylaws and what belongs in policy. And so I think this discussion suggests that as Administrator Coleman and other staff perhaps interact with Legal Counsel Peterson, that we end up getting something concrete as a proposal based on what the issues are that we've been bringing up. Regarding the idea of web meetings, it seems to me that that staff and legal counsel can come up with some wording where that could be included, either in policy, I would think, or in the bylaws. But part of it too is that when the comment was made about the health division indicating that something couldn't happen because of the virus, I think we need to have some flexibility and maybe some reference to the building that we keep talking about, the Civic Plaza, that the policies there would have to, set by the city council, would have to be overriding these kinds of things. And I think some wording can be put into the bylaws that refers to that kind of a policy and then the policy developed. Thank you.
Question for Commissioner Beloga. To your knowledge, is the council, are there any discussions about, let's say COVID has passed and we're back to in-person meetings? Has there been any discussion about, let's say, a commissioner or a council member who wants to regularly visit virtually? I mean, is there any plus or minus to that that's been discussed? I'm curious.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, there has been discussion of continuing the virtual meetings for participation. It has yet to be determined who would be eligible to do that and not do that. But we have legal department looking at it. I think the Minnesota State Legislature is looking at it. There will be some modifications at Civic Plaza to help facilitate that, both to council chambers and at least one other conference room, so that it's available to when there are concurrent meetings, so that it's not just city council chambers, but also another one. So it's not determined yet, because there are statutory provisions that need to be met also. And, but it's being worked through, and that's as much as I can give you at this moment.
Thank you. I guess my only comment would be that rather than us putting it in our bylaws or policy at this point, perhaps we wait for more of direction from the city as a whole, so we have consistency.
Chair Thorson, commissioners, I'd just like to elaborate on that a little. I had a discussion with the city attorney just briefly on, the current situation we're in right now. And the state open meeting law would not allow virtual meetings once the pandemic is no longer declared. The state agencies and certain boards are allowed under the open meeting law to have electronic meetings or meetings they call by interactive TV. But currently we would not be allowed to do that. And I believe there is some discussion at the legislature as to perhaps allowing that. So when the pandemic is no longer, when the governor's order regarding the pandemic is no longer in effect, we would be required to have live meetings, in-person meetings.
I would add that would be a relief to me, because I think it's much easier to try to run a meeting from in person rather than virtually. Do we have hands, or do we have muting taking place? Commissioner Hugiem?
I just thank you, Chair Thorson. Just a quick question. When you, just for clarification, when you mention about the governor's orders for the pandemic, does that mean his emergency powers are gone, or is that where he is going to declare that this pandemic is over? I just clarification here as someone who honestly will be probably one of the last ones vaccinated. So.
Staff, do we have a clarification on that?
I am not sure, actually, just because of everything that I've taken in the last few days between the executive orders and the legislature. I'm not sure on the governor's powers anymore, just to be perfectly honest. I believe it would be more so that we're in a pandemic, and that it would be more so probably from the federal government at this point of stating whether the pandemic is under control, but then whatever comes of the governor's executive orders. But the city has put in place a policy at this point around staff and being in person. So I think if, once we get direction from, I would say, the CDC, that it's safe to return to a certain level, that we would be, as a state, looking at that to not violate the open meeting laws, which do not allow us at this time to continue to meet virtually once that has been specified by, I would say, the federal government. But I'm not sure. So Carla, if you have anything else that you know, please chime in.
Commissioner Olson, I saw your first, and Commissioner Beloga.
Thank you. I don't know if there's an answer at this point, but I would like to ask Legal Counsel Peterson about the need. Well, it's back to an issue we've talked about before, including tonight, and that is, what is the legal standing of the HRA, the authority? And some of that's been clarified. I need to process that myself, but it seems to me that in these kinds of situations, which have an element of emergency in them, that we, to my point before, I think we need to, as an authority in Bloomington, we need to end up going with what the city does. So, for example, when emergency governor directives orders came through, the city was meeting in special session, staff and council or whatever, to make decisions. And rather than us duplicating that, it seems to me that we need to follow that, if for no other reason than because our primary meeting place is Civic Plaza. Legal Counsel Peterson, what are your thoughts?
I think it's advisable for us to follow the city's direction. I mean, there's a number of orders that have been issued with regard to the pandemic. As far as I know, the city of Bloomington has their order still in effect. The state of Minnesota still has their order in effect. And as Erica said, the federal government, the CDC, is also continuing to have the pandemic order in effect. We have the ability to do things on our own as a separate legal entity, but I think that if the city's wanting continuity and consistency, unless the HRA has a broad objection or some sort of major objection to that, that it makes sense to me that we continue to follow the city's requirements. And early on, the city attorney and I, as well as the Port Authorities Council, all three of us analyzed the statute, made a determination as to how we could conduct meetings and what needed to be done. So I would anticipate that if we're in a situation where we're trying to determine if the pandemic has been lifted and where that leaves us, that process would take place again.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Commissioner Beloga, you had your hand up earlier.
My points of order.
Any other commissioners like to be? Oh, thank you. Any other commissioners have any comments on this section before we move on? All right, we can move on to the next section.
Thank you, Chair Thorson. I just want to ask, because I'm notating the time and this is a lot of information to take in, would you like to continue on through this next section and end around 8 p.m. or would you like to try and get through this? We have quite a bit left.
Commissioners, looking for your input here. Raise your hand, speak up.
I would recommend.
Commissioner Beloga.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would recommend that we follow staff's thoughts that to be thoughtful, it takes a bit of time and concentration, and the mind can only absorb what the rear can endure, as the old saying goes. And I'm kind of restless tonight after sitting through 5 hours last night of council sessions. So that's just my personal position.
Mr. Chair?
Commissioner Lewis.
Yes. I would, I think, echo Commissioner Beloga's comments. I find the later I get into the evening, the harder it is to really focus on what we're doing. And I would rather have some time to absorb what we've covered so far and then finish up. So I think going until 8 o'clock is good, but I don't think I'd want to power through the whole evening. I think my concentration would be gone. So I'm being honest.
Commissioner Hukim, Commissioner Hukim, I see you nodding.
Yes, thank you, Chair Thorson. I agree. I think to be respectful of the process and to give my all, I would like to. I would also like to consider ending at 8, just so that we are being true to the work that needs to be done.
Commissioner Olson.
Thank you. I agree with that too. What I would request, however, is that we received a number of specific edits. If we could get from staff based on the conversation of staff, presumably some with legal counsel, that the part that we don't cover tonight, that you give us a copy of the bylaws that end up indicating staff recommendation or whatever you want to call it. I think that would help make the next meeting go a little bit more rapidly. But I think we've gotten a lot done, and I look forward to seeing what we've done in a new document. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Olson. I would also ask staff if we could get, for the portion that we did reach some conclusions and gave you some directions, if we could get a draft of those for the next meeting. So we could also touch on those, make sure we're still all on the same page before we move on to the other items. I think that might be helpful in moving things along as well, if the staff is able to pull that together in time.
Thank you, Chair Thorson and commissioners. I just love that we're all on the same page here because I was going to provide you with that I would, after this meeting, we can provide you with the edited version of what we've already discussed that includes your comments and questions so that you could at least see that. And as you're looking at the next version, the next portion, you can see how it's starting to align, and it helps to inform suggested revisions or changes that you would like to make. So thank you. This is great.
And once again, I think that getting input on the 3 versus or 4 versus 5 is important to know from the rules of order. And if it is an option for us, I just would hope everybody thinks through different scenarios themselves and make sure they're comfortable with whatever number we think we need to support. Because I believe with a board of 5 people, that's a really big decision we're making, and I think we want to be right about that.
Thank you. So the last portion, these last few minutes that we'll touch on is commissioners. It's in Article 3, commissioners, officers, administrators, staff. And it says Section A, commissioners. There shall be appointed at least 5 commissioners, but no more than 7. With that, there are some proposals here. One, adding a few 3 sub items, and want to discuss this. The appointment, so that the mayor of Bloomington, with the approval of the city council, is responsible for appointing the HRA board commissioners. So just specifying how a commissioner becomes a commissioner, even though it doesn't mention the application, it just mentions that the mayor appoints. 2, the term of service. I had previously, in my thinking, was wondering if 5 years was too long for one person when it comes to turnover of the board and representation throughout the city. I do not know. I put that back to you as commissioners because in my very limited review of the statute, it said 5 years. So that might be bigger than what I thought to think about a different term, but just specifying the term of service and that each vacancy in an unexpired term shall be filled for the remainder of the term for which the original appointment was made. So just being clear like you said earlier, Commissioner Beloga, you've had some resignations before. Just being clear that that seat needs to be filled and it will be filled for the remainder of the term. The last one was something I mentioned earlier, and I give this to commissioners to think about and to chew on, is that city council members is a section or topic of commissioners, and that a city council member of the city of Bloomington may be appointed and may serve as commissioner of the HRA. And I offer, as I mentioned earlier, to think about one, having a city council member is extremely valuable and needed. But is the city council member a commissioner or a liaison that allows for the information sharing of what the city council is thinking and working through to the HRA board, and vice versa, for the liaison from that city council liaison to also bring back to the city council what the HRA is working on and looking at and making sure it's in alignment. A liaison would be an ex officio member, which means a non-voting member. Again, that is just a thought, an idea. If that was something that is allowed, I have to say that because I'm not quite sure, I did not look at statute or anything on how this works. That would leave a seat open to be filled for the 5 members before going back to the legislature to ask for the statute authority to be changed to increase to 7 members. But that was all I had for that section, and I'll take any questions, comments, but that was the last thing for you guys to kind of just think about and chew on. I don't know. I'm new and just looking at the whole picture and how we work here.
Thank you. I do think it's something to chew on. I see personally a lot of advantages to having a sitting council member as a voting member of the HRA, and they can often, speak, with a voice to the city council. I think that a advisory, what was the term again?
Liaison.
Liaison. I think it's valuable to have a city council person at each meeting. And I might worry a little bit that if somebody is a liaison, it might, with their busy schedules, not always, rise to the top to attend the meetings. I can go, again, it's something I want to think about further myself, and I'm sure everybody else does, but I don't necessarily see a downside to how it's working today. So one of the questions I often try to ask is there something broken that we're trying to fix? And if not, worthy of discussion.
I just want to really quick, Chair Thorson. I'm not suggesting anything's necessarily broken.
Oh, and I know you aren't.
No, yeah. No, I know. I didn't. I just want to be clear. I know you weren't implying that, but in thoughts of looking at representation throughout the city, and also I know of other HRA boards or public housing boards that include a space for residents, and it could be intimidating to have, if it gets to that point. I just want to be clear, if it gets to that point, it could be very intimidating of having an elected official being a voting member on the same board with a resident or a renter maybe of one of our programs, when we're looking at trying to be more diverse and broad, but also getting people that have the background in development, finance, real estate, community engagement, and different things. So that was just my thinking that I just wanted to provide to you, but I wasn't trying to say you were implying anything.
Oh, absolutely. I'm just, again, and that's why it's important that we, I think, have the time to absorb what we've talked about today, because a lot of these are fairly significant changes. And I understand, one of the thoughts behind this is to, in effect, like open another seat that is automatically delegated to the city council to members of the community. And I think that's a worthy objective. And I think it just got muted. Commissioners, any other thoughts or comments on this particular section?
Commissioner Beloga's hand is up.
Commissioner Beloga. Commissioner Beloga.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know it's been mentioned a time or two that the appointment of commissioners is done by the mayor and approved by council, but you know, that's stuck in my mind, and I don't think that's how council is operating. I believe that council is approving the only commission that I can assure that is working in the way that has been expressed is the Port Authority. I can't say with certainty that we are or are not working that way, so I just ask that we verify with the council secretary. John, do you have any recollections that you can share?
Olson.
Would you restate that question? I'm not sure what you're asking.
Well, I believe that the HRA seats are being filled by action of the council in its entirety, rather than being appointed by the mayor and ratified by council.
Yes. Am I unmuted? In fact, I recall that we ended up having sometimes Saturday meetings or whatever to have candidates for quite a variety of the commissions meet with the whole council before that happening. So I personally am confused about what the process is, and your description of what our practice is, I guess, indicates why. So I look forward to the city staff and council working with us to get that figured out. I don't know if that really answered your question, but.
Commissioner Beloga?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Commissioner Beloga, did you have a additional comments or question?
No, I just, again, would request that staff look at council minutes and work with the council secretary to verify the practice in past years.
I see council member Hugheim, and then I would like to talk to.
I believe I just called on Commissioner Hugheim.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry. I can state that when I was voted in, council had all the resumes, and they put each council member voted for who they wanted to be assigned to the position on the HRA. So it was done by each council member, and the majority votes were the people who were appointed. Thanks.
Commissioner Olson.
Thank you. One of the things that when I was still on council, there was some discussion about who should be the liaison from the council. One of the things kind of then, but even more so since, is that, and this is not making it personal with a council member and Commissioner Beloga, but the reality is all council members have an opportunity to vote on any of the major issues that come out of HRA. And so particularly with such a small commission of only 5 people, it ends up meaning that it's 20% of the voting power in the HRA, and then 1/7 of the power on the city council. So it's like it really gives that person quite a bit of power, and council member Commissioner Beloga is up to all that. But I just think that particularly given our discussion before and my personal view, that that there's a problem that this commission does not have direct voices from the people that it represents. And so the whole idea of engagement, equity, and so forth in our major strategies for the whole city, I think would suggest that somehow or another we need to increase that. And I'm not convinced that that a council member would not consider their role as a liaison to be less important if they don't have a vote. But that's my opinion.
Thank you, Commissioner Olson. Commissioner Blogue, is that a hand up or muting?
No, just adjusting the sound.
Okay, thank you. One thing that came to mind during this discussion, you know, we haven't talked about it yet this evening, but we've only touched on the concept of, in the past, of not only thinking about board, but designations that we might have. For example, a person from the community we serve in housing. And just another thing for us to chew on is how does that relate then to the concept that the council shall appoint commissioners, because now we're providing guidance for them to appoint commissioners or categories. So on the one hand, we say it is the mayor and the city council that are appointing HRA members, and on the other hand, potentially, we haven't done it yet, but potentially we have discussed sort of categories of commissioners, and my guess is that may require the cooperation and agreement of the council as a policy moving forward. Is my guess.
Thank you, Chair Thorson. We're going to be ending, but I want to note that Carla seemed to have something, so she might have some clarification or information to provide around this topic.
Thank you very much, Eric. I was trying to get a word in, and I apologize. I've got a lot of paperwork in front of me, and so I don't have my camera working right now, so I'm kind of flipping through a lot of things here in my home office. But what I wanted to provide was just what the statute provides here, and it does specifically say the commissioners shall be appointed by the mayor with the approval of the governing body. I'm reading directly from the statutory provision. So I think the process, from what I'm hearing from our two council members, should be more along the lines of what they're doing with the Port Authority. And then the statute also does provide initial terms were staggered 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 years. But of course, you have long since gone beyond that. Then it does say thereafter, all commissioners shall be appointed for 5-year terms. There is not a requirement that a city council member be on the board. But they're permitted to do so. We did do a little bit of research to the extent that we could find information on the internet, which can be sporadic. We were able to find bylaws of 3 different HRAs, 2 of which are neighbors of yours. The Richfield HRA bylaws provide that 2 commissioners will be city council members. The Edina HRA designates all city council members simultaneously as commissioners. So every council member is a commissioner, and there are no, to my knowledge, commissioners who are not city council members. Faribault down in southern Minnesota designates 1 commissioner position for city council members. So just thought I would give you some intelligence that we have found via searching the internet as to what some other HRAs are doing. So there is not a standard practice here. So you could, provide that there would only be a certain number of city council members that will be HRA commissioners. And it does sound to me that there's some desire perhaps to increase the size of the board. And as I mentioned early on, I would suspect that would not be a hard thing to do at the legislature. I've actually spoken with Kathleen Lamb and Doug Carnival, who are both lobbyists at our firm. And we could certainly assist you with that. And that could help to, allow more representation from people that live in your project. You would be required, actually, if you go to 7 members, to have 1 commissioner be a resident of your house, one of your housing projects. So there's a lot for the board to consider, but I wanted to make sure that I pointed out the statutory requirements, as well as what some other HRAs are doing in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla.
Appreciate that.
One question for you, Carla. Are any of those entities, Edina, Richfield, or Faribault, separate entities from the city in which they serve?
All city HRAs, to my knowledge, are separate entities from the city.
Okay.
When an
Just wanted to
HRA,
make-
when an HRA is created, it is its own separate legal entity.
Yep, I just want to make that clear. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, folks, we're at 8:05 here. There's been some discussion about adjourning near 8 o'clock. Are there any final comments? I think this has been a great meeting. Lots of good information to discuss. I think we all need to think through these issues and think about different scenarios that could come about with some of these decisions, and be prepared for a robust meeting next week. Our next meeting. But with that, just please indicate, again, I don't always see all of you. Speak up, raise your hand, and let me know if you have any final comments regarding tonight.
Mr. Chair.
Or concerns. Commissioner Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had requested, and I'm not clear if that's likely to happen or not, and I'm not saying it has to, but I think it would be helpful if the ideas that were put in front of us by staff tonight as new information could be in some way provided with the packet of information we have for the next meeting when we do this, with the idea that it would streamline the meeting a little bit, give us more time to think about it. For example, it could be to strike out some things and add more, which is kind of what we did in the process tonight. So if we can do that, that would be my personal request if other people agree.
That will be done.
Thank you, Commissioner.
That will be done and provided. Yes.
Any other thoughts or comments? If not, this was a discussion item, so I suspect there's no need to continue it formally. However, does staff have are we looking at continuing this item at our next regular meeting?
Thank you, Chair Thorson. Yes, we are looking at continuing it at our next regular meeting, providing the revisions and suggestions discussed this evening, and the points of clarification or seeking additional information. And then I believe Commissioner Huhim had raised her hand in case you can't see her.
Commissioner Huhim.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to thank staff for being here and to clarify just one thing. I just had the question that Erica can hopefully answer, I'm sure. I know you had said that we are allowed to have council for one meeting. Can council carry over for the next meeting as well, just to make sure that we have someone here representing on this? I just wanted clarification. That was all.
Thank you, Chair Thorson. Commissioner Huhim, I will request council to be present at the next meeting, and I will work with General Counsel to see if that can be done.
Thank you. Good point, Commissioner Huhim. Any other comments? If not, would be looking for a motion to adjourn.
A quick comment. Since we have one free meeting, if this is a continuation, do we have to pay for, this is tongue in cheek, legal counsel Peterson next time or not? And then I will.
Perhaps we look for a motion to continue the meeting.
I will make a motion that will facilitate that if it's ethical.
So I thank you. This is Erica. I just want to be clear that through the legal services contract, it is one meeting. Even if we continue, that is not covered in the legal services contract. So yes, we will need to cover the cost of General Counsel for the next meeting that General Counsel is present at.
Okay, so I move that we adjourn the meeting.
And we have a motion. I would just indicate I was kidding about continuing the meeting. Do we have a second?
Commissioner Lewis, second.
We have a second by Lewis. Motion by Olson, second by Lewis. I will now do the roll call vote. Beloga,
Aye.
Hughiem,
Aye.
Lewis,
Aye.
Olson.
Aye.
Thorson is an aye. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Good night,
Thanks,
everyone.
Mike.
Good
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.